Coming up on the Mindful Midlife Crisis.
The thing is I was not a prolific relationship fire starter. So I just don't want your listeners to think that like I had this giant room full of people that I was like, I'm going to disappoint every one of you. And to hell with this friendship I have with each of you. You know, like it wasn't that way. It was mostly like the drinking buddies, you know, like the drinking space that I had to disappoint. Now, that said, I also got divorced. Maybe I had to disappoint my ex-wife. Maybe I had to assert myself a little bit more with my mother in certain contexts, certain conversations. Maybe I disappointed her a little bit, but you know what? I preferred that. You know what I mean? Like I felt more healthy, and that's really what it comes down to is how do you feel when you do these things? If you step up and you're assertive and you own your values, you act in accordance with your values, then that feels pretty damn good.
Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis, a podcast for people navigating the complexities and possibilities of life's second half. I'm your host, Billy Lahr, an educator, personal trainer, meditation teacher, and overthinker who talks to experts who specialize in social and emotional learning, mindfulness, physical and emotional wellness, cultural awareness, finances, communication, relationships, dating, and parenting, all in an effort to help us better reflect, learn, and grow so we can live a more purpose-filled life. Take a deep breath, embrace the present, and journey with me through the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Welcome to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm your host, Billy Lahr. Thank you for tuning in wherever you are. The purpose of this show is to provide a platform that gives people the space and permission to share their expertise and life experiences in order to help others navigate the complexities and possibilities of life's second half. And remember, this free and useful information is helpful to people of all ages. Wisdom isn't about one's age. Wisdom comes from our ability to reflect, learn, and grow from our own life experiences while also learning from the experiences of others, regardless of what stage of life we are in, because you just never know what life is going to throw at you. So there just might be a conversation or two from past episodes that help you feel better prepared for the challenges you might face in life or that you're facing right now, whether those challenges be your emotional, mental, and or physical health, your relationships with others, including your partner and children, your career, your finances, whatever curveballs life is throwing your way right now. Just know that you are not alone in your experience, and the conversations I'm having here are with people who have been there before or have done the research to help you navigate these situations with more awareness, openness, curiosity, and compassion so you can live a more purpose-filled life. And trust me, I take all of these conversations I'm having to heart as well, and I try to apply what I'm learning from these conversations, which is why I do solo episodes the first Wednesday of every month, because I think of this show as a running dialogue between me and you, the listener, because my hope is that you can see and hear the growth I'm making in my own life so that it inspires you to seek out the connections between our shared experiences so that you too can take intentional and inspired action. So, if you're looking for some ways to help you better navigate whatever you've got going on in your life from someone who's been through it before, check out some of our other episodes at www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com or wherever you get your podcasts. All month long, our episodes have been focusing on what it means to be authentic to yourself and how you can bring your authentic self to life. Today's episode focuses on how to find joy by disappointing others by living life on your terms. If you want more episodes like that, check out episode 42 with Dr. Yolanda Holloway and Tiffany Bird about what it means to trash the life checklist. You can check out episode 43 with Lori Seitz, who tells you to F-word being fine. Just want to make sure you guys are okay in case you have kids in the car. You could check out episode 43. Lori is a hoot. She also has a podcast that you could check out called Fine is a 4-letter word. Fitting for the title of that episode. You can also check out episode 58 with Val Jones about how to make being selfish work to your advantage. We also dive into managing alcohol abuse in this episode. So if you'd like to hear more stories about how people fight that good fight, check out episode 5 where my good friend and former co-host Brian on the Bass tells his story about getting sober, episode 46 with Michael Mosher about his struggles with substance abuse, and episode 61 with fan favorite Carrie Schweer about what gray area drinking is and how she helps people rethink their relationship with alcohol. So with that, let's meet today's guest. Our guest today is Stephen English. Throughout his 22 years in engineering, Stephen served as a trainer for Fortune 500 organizations, as well as influencing and managing company-wide change management activities. Stephen is an ICF Professional Certified Coach, a TEDx speaker, a trained facilitator, and founder of multiple Toastmasters public speaking clubs. Stephen specializes in helping introverted leaders find their voice so they can create impact and helps teams improve communication to achieve top performance. He is here today to talk about how he helps introverts find their voice, as well as share his journey through finding joy in disappointing others. So welcome to the show, Stephen English.
Hey, thank you so very much. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you here, man. We touched base a couple months ago, and it was a fun conversation. It lasted much longer than I think either of us anticipated. So I think we just kind of have an organic flow to conversation, and I imagine that's how today will go as well.
I'm very confident in that, Billy.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do in order to start our show is to ask our guests what 10 roles they play. And I like that you kind of gave this being John Malkovich answer here to start off. So what are the 10 roles that you play in your life?
Yeah, it's funny because that whole idea of I'm this, I'm that, I'm these various roles, it's just over my life, I've found it to be a little bit limiting. So that's why I'm the awareness of Stephen English, right? Like let me just go ahead and say that I am the watching and listening. And so yes, the being John Malkovich. Thank you for pulling that out. I'll probably go back and watch that movie again. I guess everything from, I started with something like, hey, the creator of my focus, right? So I create my focus where I focus my energy in my life. And of course, then practical things in terms of, what would be on my obituary, if you will, as a father, as a fiance, a coach, a workshop facilitator, recovered alcoholic, teacher, and speaker. So these are some of the roles that I think I play in life. And I put father first, right? Because that's my priority, obviously.
How old are your kids?
16 and 18. And they're almost completely out of the house. They're both taller than I am. In fact, my third son, so when I say fiance, my girlfriend's son or my fiance's son, he's my third son, and he is almost 13, and he's also taller than I am already. So this is pretty incredible. But yeah, my sons, that I had in my first marriage, hopefully, my second marriage will be my last marriage. They're 16 and 18. And I sometimes they have their bank accounts tied to my bank account. Well, not literally, but like I go into my bank app and I can see their bank accounts. And there are some weeks where they have more money than I do, which is just amazing. So yeah, they're practically adults.
Wow, that's very impressive. There are probably parents out there who want to know what the secret is to parenting in order to groom their child so that they are the breadwinner of the family at age 16 and 18.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I wish I knew what the secret sauce was. I think one thing that my ex-wife has done is that the child support doesn't just like flow right into their pocketbook. So those kids, they have, I guess, motivation to do for themselves. I mean, they pay for their own cars. They buy a lot of their own clothes. It's really, I don't know where they got it from, because certainly they didn't get it from me, because I was the one, I was like, hey mom, you got $20, and I took every advantage of my parents' money. But my kids, they don't ask for much. I don't know what it is. So I wish I knew what it was, because then I'd write a book and I'd probably be a millionaire. I know. Yeah. And then the whole thing would, right, and then it would undo itself. Oh, what a conundrum. I'd gladly go through that process. Kids, right now you have more money in your checking account than I do. Now, of course, that's the difference between running a business and working for somebody. Like, most of my money goes client to my business, and then I take a little bit of a draw every so often. So that's why my checking account isn't as thick as theirs.
And when I asked you what of those 10 roles are you most looking forward to, you said it was hard to pick 3 because you're looking forward to them all. What is it about all of those roles that really, really excite you?
Well, I would say that so many of the roles all tie together. So the speaker, the teacher, the workshop facilitator, the coach, Even the recovered alcoholic, they all tie to helping other people grow. So as a recovered alcoholic, for example, because maybe somebody would say, well, how does a recovered alcoholic, how does that help other people grow? Part of the way that I've kept my sobriety is by helping other people through the various recovery programs that I've been a member of. So I would say so many of them tie together in that they are about helping people go from good to great, go from high functioning to achieving whatever big goal they might have. So that's why it's tough to really go down to 3, as your question was.
Yeah, and it's that recovered alcoholic that I want to start with here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk to Stephen about his journey and what he means about finding joy in disappointing others. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. If you're enjoying what you've heard so far, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Also, giving the show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words helps others find and benefit from this podcast just like you are. Finally, please spread the wealth of free knowledge and advice in this episode by sharing it with the people in your life who may find this information and my mission to help others live a more purpose-filled life valuable. My hope is that these conversations resonate with others and inspire people to live their best lives. Thanks again. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm here talking to Stephen English, and we're breaking down a couple different things here today. Stephen's going to be talking about the joy in disappointing others. So we're going to start there. And Stephen, this idea came from a TED Talk that you did. And when we first talked in November, you talked about how soul was kind of this origin of your downward spiral when it came to your drinking. And it's something that I can completely understand because there is a prevalent drinking culture in Korea. And I know you're an introvert. So I'm wondering if the drinking started as like a social lubricant to make you feel less on edge about being in those large post-work binge drinking sessions that are quite common and legendary in Korea.
Yeah. So first and foremost, if a border or immigration member of South Korea listens to this podcast, my drinking has, please, I cannot blame it on Seoul as a geographical location, as a latitude and longitude and a location on a map. I'm not going to blame it on that. In fact, I think of it this way, is that because of family of origin, because of genetics, because of all the things that make me from time zero, I always had a pilot light burning for alcoholism. And going to South Korea for 5 weeks was like dumping gasoline on that pilot light. And there were earlier times in my life that there were, I guess you could say, a red flag being waved of, hey man, you're not drinking like the other people here. And I, at that point, didn't have enough awareness. I wasn't, I was in denial. I was young, whatever you could say, where I didn't recognize, wow, you know what, dude, you probably either have a problem or are going to have a problem. And I would say that what happened was that going to Korea for 5 weeks, whether or not the social engagement was with the coworkers, being the leadership, the Korean leadership of Samsung, or if it was just other, let's call them short-term expats, the other people that were there on assignment, it was just simply the act of doing something for 5 weeks, night after night after night. And, if you want to build a habit, sometimes people say, oh, do something for 21 days. Some, there's some studies out there that show it actually takes a lot longer than that. But when it comes to pleasurable activities, alcohol, heroin, chocolate, sex, all of these fun things, if you want to build a habit, then do them consecutively night after night for 5 weeks. And I would say that, yes, to a certain extent, it was a way of lubricating the social engine. At the same time, I was wired for it. And now looking back on it, if I could talk to the young employees at Samsung who are about to go to Korea for 5 weeks, I would give them a checklist. I would give them, hey, these are the things you need to pre-plan. Basically have yourself a life before you get there, because otherwise that whole nightlife is just going to pull you right in.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mention that, because just even when I would walk around at night, you would see people in their suits stumbling out, and even just talking to the friends that are there, like it's such a strong drinking culture. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that. It's just if you're guys like you and me, like I would consider myself a gray area drinker. We talked to Carrie Schweer about that. It sounds like you have always had kind of the physical addiction piece to it. Is that fair to say? Or because when you talk about that pilot light, I really like that analogy. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, what I mean by that is the way my body reacts to alcohol. I don't know the full science of it in terms of, the way that the body, processes the ethanol into this and that, and the differences between certain people. But I've heard this number that 8% of the population have a gene that makes them more likely to become an alcoholic. And it's because of the way the body reacts to the alcohol. And what I mean by that is this. So for example, my fiance, she's a normal drinker. She's a normie. And what that means is if I give her 2 glasses of wine, she's going to start to feel sleepy. Maybe on that 3rd glass of wine, she might even start to feel nauseous. Give me, and I'm not a wine drinker, so I'm going to change it up. Give me 2 beers and a shot of Jameson, and I'm going to be ecstatic. I'm going to be fun. I'm going to be, full of joy and ebullient, as they say. And then give me even more, and I'm going to be even more full of joy and ebullient and this and that, until the point where I start to slur my speech and start becoming an a-hole. And then that would be, if you want to be, want to turn Steve into an a-hole, is start slipping in Red Bull. So go vodka and Red Bull. After about the 5th drink, go vodka Red Bull for the rest of the night. And then you're about to see something that you don't want to see. So that's just the way my body was. I could keep drinking. And when I did, I didn't feel nauseous, tired, etc. It was like I got a second wind.
Here's my chicken and the egg question then for you, because I relate to that too. But I'm wondering, like when I was drinking, when I was younger and I was drinking heavily, I felt like it was more of the excitement of the social element that ramped up my desire to want to drink. And so then when I would drink, then it was fuel to the fire. But if I was just like in a chill mood or something like that, then I didn't want to drink. And I'm still kind of like that. I just had to teach myself how to be a social drinker, and when I'm ramped up, be able to tell myself, no, dude, you get 1. You get 2 at the most, but you definitely don't need 3. That sort of thing. So I'm curious if, what the chicken and the egg situation is there. Is it the excitement of going out and then you're already on that high and then you hit the alcohol and the alcohol is feeling good? Or is it the alcohol that ramps up the high?
Well, I'll say this. The very fact that I would drink alone prior to going out maybe is an insight into that whole thing, right? Like I didn't need the social environment to have a drink, and I would start to feel that sense of ease and comfort that came from taking a few drinks. So yeah, there is the difference, I guess you could say, in terms of like that social esprit de corps or whatever you want to call it, that the camaraderie, the fraternité, if you will, feeling of being around others and all being all whipped up on ethanol. But on myself, I know for me, I would create that feeling even alone, right? I was like, oh, look, I've got beers in the fridge and vodka in the freezer, time to start drinking. And the big moment for me was that, so Korea happened, I came back, I was drinking, but like that, there was a point at which it was Sunday morning at about 10 a.m. and I had 3 or 4 shots, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is messed up. So August 29th, 2016 was that day that I was like, here, please take this from me. Take this bottle from me. I'm going to pour all this out. I've got to stop. And that was a really tough tough day.
Those are the wild stories to me, because people can go back to episode 5 and they can listen to my good friend and former co-host Brian on the Basis story with his battle with alcohol. Listening to his stories, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was never at that point where I was waking up in the morning and needing to have a shot of something in order to function. So those stories are so wild to me. I'm curious, do you ever find yourself, or did you ever find yourself in situations, and it sounds like you kind of quit cold turkey. I find myself in situations where if I tell people, no, thank you, I'm not drinking, people leave me alone. But if I tell people I'm only having one, they're like, but don't you want two? But don't you want three? Because they see that you're having one. So they're like, well, why don't you just have another? But if you tell them I'm not drinking, they just leave you alone. And I just wish people would be like, quit pressuring me into having more than I want. This is my line in the sand. I'll have a one. And this is like my one for the month. Like, I'm not, like, I don't need to hit a quota all in one night.
Well, I think there's a couple of things in there. So one, I do want to clarify. I had never gotten to the point where I had to take a drink when I got up in the morning to get going. So that was, by the grace of God, I caught it before it got to that point. And I think that's probably why I was able to really cold turkey the whole thing, because I did have some worries about stopping. And at that point, I had already visited various, let's call them recovery clubs that weren't, inpatient or anything. And, I could talk to other people that were alcoholic and recovering. And some of them, they had to do the detox route or the rehab route. And like I said, by the grace of God, I didn't have to do that. Now, it is interesting how there is such like a peer pressure component. And thankfully, when I did stop, I found it incredibly easy to tell people I'm not drinking and them respect that. And that's even one of those fears that a lot of people who are sober curious will have, is they're going to be like, well, what am I going to do when I go out and somebody offers me a drink? It's really simple. You're going to say no. Or even better, from the minute you walk into that restaurant, bar, club, party, whatever, you are going to make a beeline up to the bar and get yourself a drink. Get yourself your LaCroix, get yourself your club soda, your Coca-Cola, whatever. And throughout the night, you're going to sip that thing. And anytime that you get even a third of the way down, a fourth of the way down, whatever, like you get down, you go get yourself another one. That way it stops that person who's like, oh, you're almost done. You want me to go get you a, whatever, hot toddy or whatever. I don't know, whatever people drink nowadays. It's like I've tried to dissociate myself from all the, whatever you're drinking
whatever the kids are drinking these days.
Whatever the young whippersnappers are drinking these days. From what I understand, they're actually doing butt chugging. Anyway, I was just in a recovery certification training course, and they had like all these different drugs and everything in there. And I was like, I know what that is. I know what that is. I know what that. And then it said butt chugging. And I was like, wait a minute. What in the wide world is butt chugging?
Well, we're gonna have to look that up later.
Yeah. Well, evidently it's taking a bottle of Robitussin and putting it in your kazoo, and the young people are doing that. So hey,
anything for a high.
Yeah, anything for a high. And you don't smell like it. That's the thing, right? You don't smell like the alcohol. I'm like, gosh, these kids, they're so innovative. What are they probably figured it out from Chat GPT. They were like, Chat GPT, find me a new way of getting inebriated without smelling like alcohol. And the robot said, stick it up your butt. Anyway, I digress. What was your question? Anyway.
I feel like we derailed, but you were talking about how if you're going out and that sort of thing, and just if you're trying to be sober curious. I remember the absolute turning point for me, and I've told this story before on the show, but the absolute turning point for me was when I first decided, you know what, I'm going to do these sober school years. And I went to our good friend Matt Hazard. Those of you who are fans of the show, you've heard him all the time on the season recap. I went to our friend Pete Bervin's house. Matt Hazard was there. Like, Matt Hazard drinks on the show, so we know that Matt Hazard likes a drink, and Pete Bervin loves to have a drink too. They asked me, hey, do you want a drink? And I said, no, I'm actually not drinking these days. And when they both said to me, hey, man, that's really cool. Good for you. It was such a weight off of my shoulder. And I think most people actually respond that way. And when I go out, I almost always have a water. And the upside to that is then you spend a lot of time in the bathroom away from those peer pressure elements as well. So I want to talk a little bit more about these peer pressure elements, because that's where this idea of finding joy in disappointing others sounds like it comes from. You did a TED Talk on this, and we'll make sure that we link that TED Talk in the show notes as well. And that title has really resonated with me right now, because I'm trying to limit the amount of people pleasing I do. I've had this newfound awareness that, all this time I've been a people pleaser and I didn't even really know it. And I think it also goes back to the conversation we had with the Trash to Checklist ladies in episode 42 about being your own author of your life and not succumbing to other people's expectations of how you should live your life. And along with that, I think, like for me, the other part that I'm constantly working through is FOMO, the fear of missing out. So what exactly do you mean by disappointing others? And what was it that you recognized in your own self-awareness of Stephen English that helped you develop the resolve to disappoint people in a healthy, self-serving way?
It's really interesting because the evolution of this idea, there was, even when I was in college, or let's say when I was going to apply to college, I remember writing in an essay how I fit in with all groups. Like I can hang out with all kinds of different people. And I used the term social quasi-crystal. And that's because I was applying to get into a physics school, into the physics program at an engineering school. So I was like, let me sound all intelligent and say quasi-crystal. And a quasi-crystal, the definition of that is it's a crystal that fits into any crystal structure, right? So there's face-centered cubic, body-centered cubic. As a quasi-crystal, you can fit into anything. And that was always me. But what I came to realize is that fitting in with everybody, number one is it's inauthentic, right? Because you're modifying who you are to fit the people around you. Also, you don't start to define your own wants, needs, desires, opinions. I was, even from a young age, I was very mindful of keeping the harmony in my environment. That's one of my, 5 top strengths on the Strength Finder assessment is harmony. And what I found was that when I looked at my drinking, a lot of it was around dealing with the resentments that I had built up from pleasing other people and doing things for other people. Resentment, it is the principal reason why so many people drink, and because it's just, it's a feeling. The definition of resentment is, feeling again and again, refeeling. And I would feel this anger and, unhappiness about doing certain things that I was doing for other people. And so the idea of finding joy by disappointing others is really just it's a snappy title that I hoped was going to get me 1 million views of my TEDx. It's a TEDx, not a TED. And I jokingly say that TED is to Lexus as TEDx is to Toyota.
Toyota's a good car too. Solid.
Or Scion or something, right? Like it's like the TEDx is the many people can get on stage kind of thing, whereas the TED is the, you better have written a few books. But anyhow, speaking of a book, and I know I'm kind of rambling, but I'll try to bring this to a point, is I had read a book called The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. So this book, Courage to be Disliked, they were talking about that when you don't put yourself first, right, then you kind of disappoint yourself. So I kind of turned that idea around and I said, okay, finding joy by disappointing others, right? So implicit in that is if I'm disappointing others, then I'm satisfying myself, like I'm fulfilling my own needs. And so that's kind of where the whole thing came from.
Well, and I like that too, because I remember when we had Val Jones on, I think that's episode 58. I'm trying to keep all our episodes straight here. I think it's 58. Val Jones, The Power of Being Selfish, right? The value of being selfish, and challenging her on that notion, like, is it really okay to be selfish? And having her reframe that. And it again reminds me of, if you're a people pleaser, you're always putting yourself second. And for me, I remember when I was drinking heavily, it was because I was playing a character that entertained other people. And that in my head, people liked me more when I was drinking because I would say and do things that were completely outlandish. And just seeing that title, like, listen, this podcast is maybe the TEDx of is the Toyota, of podcasts right here. But, I think Toyota is a pretty solid car. I think this podcast is pretty solid. And I thought your TED Talk was very solid as well, because there really is something powerful in this idea of taking a hard line and saying, you know what, I'm not going to be this person that you want me to be because it really makes me unhappy. Yeah. But it takes a real powerful sense of self-awareness in order to realize that. And so I applaud you for recognizing that. It's something that it took me, I'm still working through it.
Let me tell you, and I've said this to my kids before, is that it was in a way a true north kind of thing where it's like a compass to me, right? That even now, right? Like in preparation for today's podcast, I went back and I rewatched it and I was like, gosh, that is very, in some regards, an idealistic view. But for a person like myself, like I think that there are people out there who maybe they're already very selfish and they're very good at putting their self first. Then I don't want them to watch this TEDx. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's going to help them. And I don't think they're going to be able to see how it's applicable necessarily for themselves. Whereas there's other people out there who maybe because of family of origin or something else that they do tend to be more people pleasing and putting other people first. And as I talked about in the TEDx, this is all hardwired, right? Because we're social animals. And on the plains of Africa, if you got thrown out of the tribe, that was a death sentence, quite literally. And it probably is still happening today in certain tribes around the world. If you get thrown out of the tribe, it meant certain death. Whereas in our society nowadays, you have so many options. You have so many people around you. You're going to be able to find people who align with what you care about. And, for me, I wanted to have people around me. When I drank, there's a chicken or egg thing there. But like for me, maybe in terms of my job or my marriage or even my job, to a certain extent, there was a point there where that became, I was doing that for other people. And that's why I changed my career. The name of this podcast is The Mindful Midlife Crisis, right? And that was the inflection point for me, was having my midlife crisis made me wake up and gain that self-awareness that you talk about, and also gave me enough pain, right? So the great quote by Michael Beckwith is, pain pushes until the vision pulls. I had enough pain pushing me that I said, hey, I got to go find something different to do, or else I'm going to blow my freaking brains out.
Well, and you talked about tribe too, and I'm guessing you had to take a long, hard look at your network and make some adjustments there as well. And you're an introvert, so I can only imagine how difficult and energy sucking that must have been to reinvent your network to some extent. What were some of the strategies you used to establish healthy relationships, not only with people who would add positive value to you down the road in the future, but also demonstrating value to people who were in your life, who you still saw positive value, but you had burned that bridge to the ground so long ago?
So there's a couple of parts to this question. So number one, I feel like, the label of introvert for me is, I do recharge like an introvert. I like to be alone. That said, there are parts of me that are more extroverted in terms of the social skills and the communication skills and things like that. So just one little point of clarification, because I think that some people, they may either see me or, whatever, if they go and they look at my LinkedIn page, I don't necessarily identify as one or the other. I guess I'm going to play the ambivert card here. But, you said something about, the strategies to establish the healthy relationship. So for so long, I was always reading the room and responding to these social cues. And that led to that inauthenticity, right? So my strategy was to slowly build up my assertiveness, right? And become a little bit more transparent with people and say what I really, really felt, come what may. Yes, some people it repulsed, and that was fine. That's good, right? Like, at least what I knew was that if somebody didn't like me, they didn't like me for my true self. That was the first thing in terms of a strategy, is to really get quiet with yourself, get to know what you really do like. And I think I mentioned this in the TEDx. The good part about recovery is get your feelings back. The bad part about recovery is you get your feelings back. So I started to really assess, like, hey, what is it that makes me happy in this world when, I'm feeling joy over here? This thing over here is nothing but anguish, guilt, shame, ick. So I started to be able to separate those things out. And so then I would assert myself more in the spaces that I was passionate and excited about. And like I said, if it pushed people away, then that's great. As for the burning the bridges question, that's funny. I can't think of any relationships that I did try to rebuild. That was
interesting.
Well, the thing is I was not a prolific relationship fire starter. So I just don't want your listeners to think that, like, I had this giant room full of people that I was like, I'm going to disappoint every one of you, and to hell with this friendship I have with each of you. Like, it wasn't that way. It was mostly like the drinking buddies, like the drinking space that I had to disappoint. Now, that said, I also got divorced. Maybe I had to, disappoint my ex-wife. Maybe I had to assert myself a little bit more with my mother in certain contexts, certain conversations. Maybe I disappointed her a little bit, but you know what? I preferred that. You know what I mean? Like, I felt more healthy. And that's really what it comes down to is how do you feel when you do these things? If you step up and you're assertive and you own your values, you act in accordance with your values, then that feels pretty damn good. And that's how I had to get going here, in terms of changing my life.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk to Stephen about some of the strategies he uses in order to help introverted leaders find their voice. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. New episodes come out every Wednesday to help you get over the midweek hump. If you'd like to contact me, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like to hear on the show, visit www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com and click Contact Us. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. You can also click on the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. If you want to check out my worldly adventures, follow me on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. My hope is that my trials, tribulations, and successes will inspire you to take intentional action to live a more purpose-filled life. And while you're at it, remember to show yourself some love every now and then, too. Thanks again. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. I'm here talking to Stephen English. He's sharing with us his journey about finding joy in disappointing others. We covered that here. So now we're going to move on to the work that he's doing now, which is helping introverted leaders find their voice. And Stephen, you and I connected on LinkedIn, and you have a very entertaining LinkedIn page. You are maximizing LinkedIn. And in one of your recent posts, you donned some sweet aviator sunglasses and rocked an excellent 70s, 80s mustache. And you gave a shout out to some of your clients who have stepped through their BS. But BS has a double meaning for you when you're coaching. Talk about that double meaning of BS and talk about some of the BS that you had to step through. You've mentioned that already, but then how do you help people step through that as well when you're working through them?
So working with people on their BS. So, BS, of course, when people see that in a post, they immediately think the droppings from a male cow, right? The bull droppings, as it were.
We can say bullshit on the show.
I don't know how PG-13 I got to keep this. I'm like, did I already drop some F-bombs?
We are not. This is not PG-13.
Wait a minute. I thought this was sponsored by Disney.
Not yet.
No, but yeah. Sponsored by Pfizer. So bullshit that people have, right? So BS is belief systems, and BS is, obviously bullshit, right? And I conflate those two, right? That acronym, and I let it have those double meanings because I think it is truly appropriate in that a lot of the belief systems, and by belief systems, I don't mean the religion that you are a member of, or the God that you worship, or anything like that. I don't mean in that frame. I mean the things that you believe are true, the thoughts that you believe are true, that you think about over and over and you accept, right? And so that's a belief system, right? And for example, for me, one of the big BS limiting beliefs, now I'll just add that word limiting in front of it. The limiting belief that I had was that, engineers can't become coaches, or I'm not capable of recovering from alcoholism, or I'm not capable of starting my own business. I'm not capable of delivering a TEDx speech. So there's all these different beliefs that we have, these limiting beliefs, that things we believe are absolutely true, but that simply are not. And we have downloaded, quote unquote, these beliefs from people in the world. Maybe we had a teacher, or we had a parent, or somebody who told us we can't do something. We had a boss who had some comments. That's the first side of it. And in terms of, how do I help somebody with that, is we first look at, like, what's the pattern of behavior or the emotion that they're feeling, and then understanding, well, what would you have to believe for that to be true? Right? So you have this challenge. This is something you can't do for whatever reason. Well, what do you have to believe? And so that's where those limiting beliefs start to show up for people. For example, certain clients might have I think 70% of people have this limiting belief of, I'm not good enough, right? Or I'm not smart enough, or I'll never be successful, or I'm not charismatic, or whatever it might be. And these limiting beliefs, we come along and we have to understand where they came from. Second, we have to identify what could be, looking at that event, what could be an alternative interpretation of that. And then we start to question, hey, could that also be true? The fact that there are multiple interpretations means that there's no implicit meaning to an event. I know that now we're getting really deep, but I just, walk you through the process. And this isn't a process I came up with. This is Morty Lefko came up with this. I think it was in the 80s. Morty Lefko has since passed, and his wife, Shelley Lefko, teaches this process that I'm alluding to. I use it with my clients to dissolve a limiting belief.
So when they have that epiphany of these self-limiting beliefs, how do they respond to that? I imagine there's a range of emotions. I'm sure some people, it might be emotional to the point of just like, I've never realized that, and they break down in the tears. I also wonder if you have some denial or even regret. So how do you help people navigate through that new awareness? Because that's a big deal when you start to see those self-limiting beliefs and how they have impacted your life so up to this point.
Well, the thing is that I'm not diagnosing the limiting belief. They're identifying it for themselves. They believe that it could be true. And sometimes they'll go, you know what? I know logically it's not true, but I kind of feel it. And I'll use a little test with them to calibrate, something that is completely untrue and something that is completely true. And then, that'll serve as kind of a contrast point to this feeling that they're getting. And they could have it somewhere in their body. I've had some clients that are like, I know it's not logically true, but when I say it out loud, I get this tension in my throat, or my stomach starts to hurt. And then that's how they know that it might be true. But again, I'm not telling them something. I'm not going, well, wait a minute, you've got this limiting belief. So they don't get into denial. They don't. Now they may have an emotional reaction only because it's just like one of those like tough truths. And I've had some people cry. I've had people cry, especially when we went into what was the event. Where did that limiting belief come from? And then they go back and they might talk about something that was, mildly traumatic to them. So yeah, it's a really interesting process. And I think what it comes down to is what makes it work is once we start to see those alternative interpretations. If you think about the brain as like a matrix of literally charge, because that's what it is, right? We've got these synapses, we've got this electrical charge flowing through the brain. If you think about a memory as a location in the brain, if you go and you say, that not a memory, but like a limiting belief, some piece of data in the brain, if you go and you say, here's this alternative interpretation, in some way, at least this is my feeling, is it almost like discharges it. It says it could be these other things. It may not be like I interpreted this event, my father saying this thing to me. I let that mean I'm not good enough. But maybe what it really meant was that he's doing the best he could with what he knew to do as a parent, or he was raising me the way that he was raised, not that I'm not good enough. I think what happens is we start to see these other possibilities, and it literally takes that limiting belief and it electrically neutralizes it.
You clarified and said that you're more of an ambivert. You're working with introverts. What was the draw to work with introverted leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really comes down to this. In lean manufacturing, so there's going to be some people that are going to understand this, and then there's going to be people that I'm going to explain this to. In lean, there's something called the 7 types of waste, and there's actually an 8th type of waste, but those 7 types, it makes an acronym called TIM Wood. So transportation, inventory, movement, waiting, overprocessing, oversupply, and defects. The last one, the 8th waste, is skills. And what I truly, truly believe is that you've got a portion of the population that is wasting their skill because they cannot communicate and influence their ideas. Think of it this way. If you've got the general population is 43 to 47% of the population are introverts. They identify as introverts. And I would say that in tech, in accounting, and in legal and in medical, there's some of these types of occupations that I think the percentage is even higher. I would venture to say if we went over to Google and we went to some software development group and swung around the extroversion introversion detector, we'd be like, it'd be just going off like crazy on the introvert scale. So I feel like they're holding a lot back. Why I'm drawn to it is I know that inside of an introvert are some amazing, amazing ideas, and I want to help them bring that out into the world. Actually, I'll give you a better example. I used to just always work with all these introverts, and they would say, hey, I got this data, but I want to get these people over in this other department to do something. And I would go and I would grab them and grab their data, and we'd walk over there and go do something with them. I would influence these other people in these other departments. So I think I was always doing it when I was in corporate. And so I figured, well, hey, there's people out there that need to learn how to do this. So I wanted to work with them.
It reminds me in that scene of Office Space where they're talking to the guy.
Mark the time. Like, that's the second time today. Just so you know, Billy, I'm a people person. I take the requirements from the customer and I take them to the programmers.
So that's the second time this has been referenced to you today?
Today. My gosh. I know what I'm watching tonight.
So I'm going to get you out of here on this. I'm an extrovert. I've got a big personality. What is it about big, obnoxious personalities like mine? What do we get wrong about introverts? And what do introverts get wrong about themselves?
Yeah. I love that question. I think what it is extroverts get it wrong that if the introvert has nothing to say at that moment, that they are disinterested or that they're aloof. They get it wrong that the introvert doesn't want to talk. And what the introvert needs from the extrovert is, one, a little bit of space. And I don't mean physical space. I mean time space, like time to think about something. So if you're an extrovert leader and you've got a team that has a mix and there's some introverts, is give them a little bit of time and ask them, what's your opinion? What's your advice? I know you're a great listener and you've been thinking about this for a while. What's your advice on this? I'd really love to hear it. My goodness. If extrovert managers simply did that, everything would change, because these introverts are not going to interject. They're not going to go, oh, wait a minute, boss, I got this great idea. But if the extrovert boss or team member or whatever simply asks, the introvert is going to answer.
But I don't want to sit in that awkward silence. I want to fill the space with my own voice. That's why I have a podcast, because I love the sound of my own voice.
I love your awareness, Billy.
I mean, the podcast has actually really taught me to be a listener.
Yeah.
And to be more present with my guest and take in what they're saying. So I can really appreciate that. And I think my natural default, if I'm in a meeting, is to fill the space or to jump to a conclusion. And that's something that I'm constantly working on. So I think that's a good lesson. That's good practice for the extroverts out there, is that, hey, really work hard to take a space. It's probably going to be just as hard for you to take that space as it is for the introvert to interject.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I'd say it might even be harder for the introvert to interject. I don't know. That's a tough one. It would depend really where a person is on the EI scale, because it's not a 0-1 kind of thing, or -1 +1 kind of thing. There's a whole spectrum. I would say then, introverts do get it wrong that others don't want to hear their ideas. That's like just they, oh, well, no one, or that they're not. This would be the other part of it, because the introvert superpower is preparation. So an introvert will generally go into a conversation very well prepared. If they know, okay, this meeting has been on my agenda, this is the agenda in the meeting, these are the topics, these are the things that we need to discuss, they're going to come in really, really well prepared. Now, the thing that an introvert needs to know is that they're probably over prepared, and that they need to simply say what it is that they really believe and what they feel they know. And so many times, and I've had clients who are like this. They're like, I'm not ready. And I'll say, well, what is the criteria for you that this will be ready? For example, with like a piece of software, they're like, well, it needs to do this, 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 and this. And I said, well, what's the true objective of the meeting you're going to? They're like, well, I just want to know that people like my idea. And I'm like, well, wouldn't that just be the minimum viable product? Like, how do you define the minimum viable product? And then they realize, they're like, oh gosh, I've already got it. And what it is, they just need a push, honestly. Like, that's, as a coach, like a lot of times that's what I'm doing, is I'm just giving them that nudge, and I'm holding them accountable.
Do you see any value in these personality profile tests? Like, I remember I did Insights, and I actually found it to be quite valuable, because it was scarily accurate in describing me, but then it also helped me understand my colleagues a little bit better too. Now, unfortunately, people would box you into those. That's always been my issues with Myers-Briggs, is that you get boxed into those.
Yeah.
And they say, with Insights, they would say, well, it's because you lead with red, da, da, da. And it's like, well, yes, that's my default, but I also, I'm a human being. I'm complex. There are these other things. I am capable of being emotional as well. I am capable of coming at you with data and details, that sort of thing. Just because I lead with red, which is, basically be brief, be bright, be gone, I do have these other abilities. But I'm wondering if those personality profile tests help people, particularly in organizations, better understand each other. And then does it allow leaders to be like, okay, you've kind of got this personality type. It's your default. It's not to say that this is the only thing you can do, but it's your default. You have this personality type. You have this personality type. You have this personality type. Let's see if we can put you all together and see what sort of synergy this group can produce. Do you see any value in that, or is that overcomplicating it?
Well, I think there's a lot there to unpack that you said. So, a couple of things I heard you say was, well, one, when you first read it, you were like, oh, this is eerily similar to who I am. You also alluded to almost weaponizing personality types, which there's been cases of people who were applying for a job and their personality assessment stopped them from getting a job. And there's also been managers who weaponize personality types against their employees, right? So saying, well, gosh, you're an INTJ, so we definitely don't want to put you in front of the customer or something to that effect. So it's a really complex question. In fact, I think it's called Personality Brokers. There's a book called Personality Brokers. I might be off on the title. And then there's the book Personality Isn't Permanent by Dr. Benjamin Hardy that really treat these topic in much greater detail. I'll say this is that I take from it what is actionable. So in other words, knowing, okay, I have these types, and I'm a bigger fan of DISC than I am Myers-Briggs. I like that because it is a behavioral assessment, not a personality assessment. It gets down into behavioral tendencies that people have. It also says, okay, hey, if you're working with a high D or high I, I'm guessing you're probably a high I for influence. How is it that one would work with that other person? So I think your original question was, are they useful? I'm like, yeah, they're useful. They also can be dangerous in that when people start to weaponize them. But I think, yeah, we have to kind of take them with a grain of salt and recognize that they're not, kind of going back to the title of the Benjamin Hardy book, they're not permanent. It's a tendency. It just means that doing something that's a little bit against the grain is going to just take more energy, but you're certainly going to be able to do it. I'm an SI. One would say, okay, well, the opposite of an SI is a DC. So can I be conscientious and directive? And yes, I can. I can go pull data and then become, very assertive with somebody. It's not going to be I would say, the lowest energy path for me. So anyway, I know I didn't really answer your question in perfect clarity because it is a big, big topic. I think it's $1 billion industry, the personality assessments. And on top of that, there's been a ton of authors who have come along and kind of teared this stuff down. I'm a firm believer, though, that you can steam off any of these labels and you can really be whatever you want to be.
Well, hey, if you're out there and you are looking to find your voice, if you're looking to step through your BS of self-limiting beliefs, give Stephen a follow on LinkedIn. That's where all the quality stuff is there. It's very entertaining. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. It was great to be on here, Billy. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Hey, if you enjoyed this week's episode, be sure to look in the show notes for all of Stephen's contact information. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple listener, you can do that by clicking the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. Also, please do me a favor and leave a 5-star review with a few kind words. Or if you're a Spotify listener, click those 5 stars under the show art after you click the follow button. If you'd like to share your thoughts on this week's episode, you can find all of my contact information in the show notes as well. Feel free to email me your takeaways from this conversation to mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com. You can also follow me and DM me on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. You can find me on LinkedIn at Billy Lahr, that's LAHR, or you can send a message to the contact page at www.mindfulmidlifecrisis.com. While you're there, feel free to join our Mindful Midlife community for free resources that will help you live your life with more curiosity, openness, compassion, and awareness. Some of you might skip this part at the end because it's the same every week, but here's the thing. If you did, you're going to miss out on some really valuable information because if you are one of those people who are interested in learning more about the benefits of mindfulness, I invite you to join our mindful meditation community where I'll be leading free virtual guided mindful meditations every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time and every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Korean Standard Time. Do the math and figure it out. But for more information, click on the link in the show notes. Finally, I know Stephen and I would greatly appreciate it if you would share this episode with the people in your life who may benefit from Stephen's expertise and life experiences. Remember, the purpose of this show is to help you navigate the complexities and possibilities of life's second half, and I hope this conversation provides some insight that will help you reflect, learn, and grow so that you can live a more purpose-filled life. So for Stephen, this is Billy. Thank you for listening to the Mindful Midlife Crisis. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved. Take care, friends.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If this episode resonates with you, please share it with your family and friends. We will do our best to put out new content every Wednesday to get you over the midweek hump. If you want episodes to be downloaded automatically to your phone each week, all you need to do is hit the check mark, subscribe, like, or follow button, depending on what podcast format you're using. While you're at it, feel free to leave our show a quick 5-star review with a few kind words so more people like you can easily find our show. If you're really enjoying the show and you want to help us out, feel free to make a donation to www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. That's www.buymeacoffee.com/MMC podcast. You can also access the link in our show notes. We use the money from these donations to pay whatever expenses we incur from producing the show, but ultimately, we record this show for you. So if you keep listening, we'll keep recording and releasing new episodes each week regardless. If you'd like to contact us, or if you have suggestions about what you'd like us to discuss on future episodes, feel free to email us at mindfulmidlifecrisis@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at mindful_midlife_crisis. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the articles and resources we reference throughout the show. Thanks again for listening. May you feel happy, healthy, and loved. Enjoy the show.